How do you train speed and endurance at the same time? Well, the first thing that we need to understand is that speed and endurance are two separate qualities. All right, speed is going to be anaerobic and it's going to be short bursts of explosive movements. So think of stuff like plyometrics or high sprint training or even max effort jump training. Ground contact times are going to be fast. You're usually going to be in a horizontal angle, especially if it's like short sprint training. And then endurance is kind of the exact opposite, right? So a lot of people get the myth that speed and endurance are the same thing. You should be training speed like you train endurance. It's 400 repeats, 2 times or 10 times 200 meters. These type of things are not what you would do for speed training. Speed training is usually going to be under 40 yards because the total time of sprinting should be under 6 seconds. The second you go above 6 seconds of max effort, whether it's jumping or sprinting, that's going to be aerobic. Even if it's anaerobic endurance, it's not pure anaerobic power. We're going to be training more aerobic qualities. So if we're separating these qualities, it makes things a lot easier to understand how we should train it. If it's speed training, then we should be doing it 2 to 3 times per week. But endurance training, depending on the sport, might be 1 time per week and it might be 5 times per week. It depends on the sport. So let's say you're doing track and field, then yeah, you're probably gonna be running the 400 and 200. Then you should be doing some speed endurance training, which is anaerobic endurance. That's gonna be stuff like running 200 meters at max effort and then resting, or even running 60 yards to 100 yards at max effort and then resting and doing that 3 to 4 times, kind of like you would do speed training. But if it's endurance that's more aerobic in nature, it's not cyclical or there's not big rest in between, like 400 meter sprint and then you pause for a long period of time and then another 400-meter sprint. That's going to be stuff like basketball where you're repeating the same thing over and over again. This is going to be aerobic in nature. You cannot have multiple max effort outputs if all you're doing is sprinting without stopping, right? So in basketball, you go on the defensive end, you're playing defense, and then you automatically sprint to offense, and then you play offense, and then you sprint to defense. The most rest you get is maybe a free throw or random stopping of the game, whatever type of foul it is. But that's not like football where you sprint max effort for 5 yards, then you rest for a minute, and then you do it again, and then you rest for a minute. That's going to be more anaerobic endurance. But for this type of stuff, let's say basketball, soccer, or even cross country, then yeah, you should be training speed endurance separately, and it's going to be a lot more jogging for 30 minutes, running 400-meter repeats, or running 200-meter repeats. But if the goal is speed and endurance, so max effort endurance, that speed endurance that you're going to actually see at a max effort fast break or a max effort 200-meter sprint, then yes, you need to be training endurance with the qualities very similar to natural sprint training. I'll probably break this down into two categories. If it's just sprint training, keep the distances under 300 yards of total distance, and you're going to sprint as hard as possible with high rest, usually 5 to 7 minutes in between each set, kind of like if you're actually running a racing 100-meter dash. Now, if it's stuff like basketball or soccer where it's more repeated efforts and it's not max intensity, it's more low intensity plyometrics or an extensive plyometric that's repeated at a high effort. Because the effort is high, that doesn't mean the output's high, right? That doesn't mean you're producing high force, which means you need to do more stuff like sprint as hard as possible for 3 minutes, right? So you're going up and down, kind of like the suicides, but you do it for 3 minutes straight, or you run 250 to 400 meters of total sprinting nonstop, and then you jog, and then you sprint again, kind of like that interval based training. You do the same thing for soccer. You can go all the way down the soccer field, and then all the way back, and do that for 3 minutes and see how far you get, and then mark it. Let's say you touch each line about 10 times, and you got to get it 20 times next time. Whatever it is, you can make a game out of it, but that's the type of endurance you should be doing. No sport where you're sprinting at high effort, so soccer, basketball, baseball, hockey, nothing where you're sprinting hard. You should be doing stuff that's the exact opposite, right? There should be some type of high quality sprint work within that endurance training. Like I said, it's not the same qualities. We're not training speed, but the endurance should be fast, right? There is no high correlation to just running, let's say, a 10-mile day or a 5-mile day and think that's going to transfer over to your 400-meter dash, right? If you wanted to increase your bench press, you would not say, okay, well, we need to do 5 sets of 40 reps of 135 so we can improve our 315-pound bench press. That doesn't correlate, right? We're not just training endurance to get max effort output. We need to train endurance as specific as possible to the sport. So usually either 3 minute test or sprinting as hard as possible is going to give you the best results. And then in terms of how often you should be training endurance with speed where you don't actually hurt yourself, I would probably say you shouldn't be doing more than 45 minutes of long distance running if you are going to do, let's say you're just running miles or 30 minutes a day because you need to lose some weight or whatever it is, let's say cardio, right? So that's 15 minutes every other day. I wouldn't do more than 3 to 4 days of endurance training per day, especially if your sport is giving it to you. If you're playing basketball or you're doing full on skills training, you don't need extra endurance on top of that. Besides maybe just playing 5v5, that can be your endurance training. And if you're doing track and field, you're probably going to have tempo days in where you don't need the extra endurance training, or you're already doing that really hard, maybe on a Friday, that max effort speed endurance training. So usually, like I said, no more, minimum one, right, for most sports. And then I wouldn't do more than 3 to 4 days. Honestly, I'd probably stick to 1 to 2 days for most people, and then let your sport be the endurance because that's going to be the most specific transfer to your sport.